Hi, welcome Sounds True friends. This special event, Tapping in Action. We are celebrating the release of the new book, Tapping, Self-Healing with the Transformative Power of Energy Psychology. It's the book's birthday today. Its official release date. David Feinstein and Donna Eden are here with us along with their colleague, Dawson Church, and we are going to be experiencing tapping for ourselves. The book is a guidebook. It covers so many different applications of how you can use tapping, and we're going to, pun intended, tap into that here in this special. Let me tell you a little bit about the colleague that is joining us, Dawson Church. He's an award-winning science writer and researcher. He's the founder of EFT Universe, EFT being a protocol that is a type of tapping, and EFT Universe is one of the most visited place on the web to be trained in EFT tapping. Dawson is the founder of the Veterans Stress Solution, which brings EFT to more than 20,000 veterans. And in my experience, he's one of the most creative and innovative spokespeople for tapping in the whole world. Dawson, first of all, welcome. So happy to have you here with us.
Tami, it's a joy, and we're going to have a fantastic time together. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. And of course, we're here with Donna Eden and David Feinstein. Donna, one of the most well-respected and joyous energy healers in the whole wide world. And her partner, David Feinstein, clinical psychologist. Together, they wrote the book on energy medicine and now the book on tapping. David, Donna, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So we're going to soon start doing this thing that looks a little funny. We're going to be like tapping here and saying various things. And right here in the beginning, at least it looks a little funny to me. Let's say after David and Donna, I recently interviewed you. There I was sitting at the dinner table and I was just kind of going like this and joking. And, okay, what is actually going on in our body, mind, when we're doing tapping that makes it so effective that the three of you are here as its proponents? I think I still have a very vague notion of how the method works. David, maybe you can kick us off here.
Well, first of all, it looks ridiculous. I mean, what does this have to do with changing deep-seated psychological issues? It makes no sense at all. But when you really take it apart, you find out that adding the tapping to the words does something that talk therapy cannot do nearly as effectively, not nearly as fast. What happens, as I understand it, and as more and more research is validating, is that when you tap on certain points, which are electrochemically active, that these points convert the pressure of your tapping into electrical signals. And those signals then go somewhere. And where they go is along the connective tissue. The body's connective tissue is made up in part of collagen, which is a semiconductor, and so it's able to move very quickly, much faster than if it was going along the nervous system, which is synapse to to nerve cell to synapse. It's just boom. And where does it go? Well, it goes to the part of the brain that has become active by the words that you're using or the images that you're using. So if you, for instance, you're tapping on a fear, specific fear, say fear of heights, you would imagine the fear of heights, you'd say fear of heights, you might imagine a specific place where we're afraid in the past, and that activates the part of the brain that is involved with emotions. the limbic system, particularly the amygdala, which is the threat center. And even if you're just thinking it, just talking about it, it goes into that threat response to a degree, just like it would if you were actually facing a height. So that signal that we tapped on the signal, it generated the impulse, the electrical charge that goes to that part of the brain. When you think about the fear of heights, when you think about your height, the amygdala goes into a reaction. It becomes very hyper. You tap and it sends the signal that lowers, that decreases that reaction. So it's going down like that. So that is basically what is happening in a lot of psychological issues, is that there's something that has gotten elevated, whether it's jealousy, whether it's fear, whether it's anger, and the tapping is able to reduce it. Now, it does other things also. So one of the things that happens, say, if you're dealing with fear, is that there is the part of the brain that is trying to manage the fear, that is trying to problem solve around it, the prefrontal cortex. So it also, because it's been active, attracts the signal, and then because acupuncture points actually do what the body needs, it increases the activity in that frontal part of the brain so that you become better at problem solving, better at managing stress. So you have two things going on at once. You're decreasing the arousal in the emotional part of the brain, you're increasing the arousal in the problem solving part of the brain.
And Dawson, what would you have to add to that?
One really graphic illustration to me has been to do a lot of research using EEGs over the last 20 years. And Tami, it's so amazing to hook someone up to an EEG and have them remember the car crash or the bitter divorce or the death of a loved one or something else that's highly emotionally triggering to them. When they remember that, that middle part of the brain, the emotional midbrain David referred to, becomes red on our EEG scan. So here we're seeing into the brain through the EEG. The thinking about this memory and that thought is triggering the emotional brain, and that part of the brain just lights up. What is so absolutely stunning to watch is they start to do this. This is one of the fundamental points they use. They start to tap on this part of their body. Then they tap on the other points. We'll tap on all these points with you today as well. You'll see them in action. You'll feel them shift in your body. And you watch that red lit emotional midbrain on the EEG on your screen turn green, just go back to normal in seconds. And so it's this amazing ability of our bodies to process energy, process information. When we tap very, very quickly, it attenuates that fear response. And after a few minutes, people are saying, you know, I remember that terrible car crash. I can remember every detail of it. I just no longer am emotionally triggered by any of it. So as we've developed the ability to peer into things like the brain, the body, hormones, genes, we've seen these radical shifts happen in people's well-being, and they happen just like that in a few seconds.
Donna, Dawson brought up tapping the side of our hand. And I'm wondering, when you do that, what's your experience of what is shifting in that particular point?
That's along heart meridian, where he's tapping right there. And you, first of all, you see a spark. You do see a spark of energy, and then you see it start pulsing up the meridian line. Wherever.
Better explain that you see it, but not everybody sees it.
Well, well, I do. I see it, and it is amazing because it's a pulsing rhythm that just goes right up to the brain, and it's astonishing and wonderful to watch as it shifts. Just like Dawson just said, that red light turns to green, well, you see the colors of energy shifting and changing as it moves up to the brain. So long before it gets to the brain, it's happening in the meridians. And it'll, even though you're tapping on a meridian line, which is the pathway that energy travels on, you can also see shifts in the chakras as it happens. And you can see shifts in your aura. You see all of these amazing things happen.
One of the things I'm really curious about is that I think most of us have the experience of, I'm going to call it like a brain rut, that there's some way that we notice our mind goes into some type of thought pattern that's not particularly helpful to us, but it just does it again and again. It's so well trodden. It's so well grooved. And I'd love to understand more how repeated tapping, repeating this protocol, how it changes that groove. Because I think all of us would like to get out of certain brain grooves that they just seem to go on their own. They're so habit trained. Dawson, maybe you could start us off on this.
Well, that's a function of evolution that's actually very handy, Tami, because your ancestors needed to remember the bad stuff. They needed to obsess about the snake that almost bit them yesterday and the snake that might bite them tomorrow. It was a really great behavior to worry about those bad things in the past and project them out into the future and think how they could recur. So when there's a problem or a potential problem, our brains just tend to keep on focusing on it. So here we go along. We read The Power of Positive Thinking. We take a wonderful class by a fantastic sounds true teacher. We feel much better. And then the next day, we're stuck in that same rut again. We cannot pull ourselves out of these ruts easily, cognitively. And what Donna and David and I and energy feel people are talking about is we can do it energetically, and we can interrupt those patterns somatically. When you tap, when you shift the body's energies, then you aren't trying to convince the brain not to think about the bad thing. So you, in fact, what's very paradoxical and what's weird, if you watch some of our videos on YouTube, for example, you'll see that we're actually having people think about the bad stuff. Think back to the auto accident, think back to the divorce, think back to the problem in your life, focus on that and activate all of that brain material. When you are activating then that part of the brain that is holding the memory and processing the fear, so now you've activated the fight or flight response in your brain and your body. And then the second signal comes along to your body of tapping on acupuncture points. Now your body's getting a second signal which says, I'm okay. If there really were a snake off me right now, I wouldn't be tapping. So the fact that I'm tapping, the fact that I'm calming myself means that this memory, this traumatic loop I've had running in my brain, this rut I've been digging myself with negative thinking, is not really a threat to my survival. And once you break that association one time, it stays broken. One young Iraq veteran I worked with, he had a terrible memory of having to clean the uniform of his friend who'd been killed in combat. And they were sending the uniform back to the parents in the US, and he drew the job of cleaning this bloodstained uniform of his friend. And he called it the worst day of his life. I tapped with him on that memory, and he went down from being highly emotionally triggered, where he could hardly even talk. He was so emotionally aroused by this whole horrible event, to being calm about it. I ran into him at a conference a few months later. He said, you know, I'm glad I was the one who got to clean the uniform. It was an act of love. So it went from being the worst day of his life to an act of love in his conscious mind without any cognitive work at all, just by interrupting that flow of information, that old rut he was in. The tapping shifted him. And when you break that association in the brain one time, usually it stays broken forever. That's the power of using energy therapies rather than trying to dig yourself out of your holes with cognitive or thought processes.
Well, that's a pretty exciting promise that if you break it one time, it could stay shifted. And we're going to be doing that soon because I'm very excited about that. David, what would you like to add?
Well, that was a great answer, Dawson. I think it really explains it. And there is a process called memory reconsolidation. And it's kind of the scientific explanation of what Dawson just said. And the key of this whole process of taking a memory, the rut you're talking about, it's not just for memories, it's also for our internal models. And our internal models are really what keep that rut stuck. So when you are able to have a surprise experience, that is the moment that the reconsolidation happens, that that model changes, that the rut changes. So when Dawson's client had that experience of thinking about that bloody uniform and not being aroused, that is the surprise moment. In that surprise moment, you have the whole shift happen. And what's so valuable to me as a therapist is knowing that I can create that surprise moment by working at the level of the neurochemistry. It's not something you can talk people out of. You usually can't talk people very easily out of those ruts, but you have the experience where your body is reacting differently and everything changes at that moment.